the Faster Than Light radio show.
Welcome once again to the show, and thanks for joining us. Got an interesting half hour ahead of you. Of course, science fiction and fantasy in review, and the featured author for this week is Gregory Benford, and I'll be looking at the whole gamut of his works, including the very good and recently available Timescape, which is available on Sphere. More of Gregory Benford later. I thought I might kick off the program with an interesting event I had recounted to me last week, and I failed to mention on last week's show. It had to do with the reception of that amazing ABC simulcast of the opera, which had Joan Sutherland singing in that rather remarkable Italian tenor. And they were putting together the opera evidently for West Australians, but it was interrupted for 5 seconds. The television sets went snap, crackle, pop and went grey, and noise came out of them, etc., etc. And one of my friends, being the sort of person that she is, decided to ring the Bickley Observatory and find out why it was that we had this interference with our reception. Evidently she wasn't the only person who rang, and the man on duty at the Bickley Observatory assured her that the reason for it was returning Russian space junk getting in the way of the beam of the transmission coming from the satellite that was broadcasting it to us from the eastern states. This absolutely amazed me. I mean, I can take the Russians doing just about anything to our land, but when they interrupt the television programs, I mean, that's another thing. And when they're doing it with space junk, not even meaning to do it, I mean, that's the real basis of a science fiction story. I thought you'd enjoy that, and of course you did. Well, not so much in reality, more an unreality, but one which you can see in a more tangible way. Carrying on out at Wait is the 4th Festival of Science Fiction and Fantasy Cinema. They've had a very, very good showing to the last couple of weeks. In fact, last week most of the programs were sold out, selling out on the night of the actual showing, but nevertheless most of the programs have been selling out. The most popular program, I'm assured by Gillian Walker so far, and she's the manageress out there at Wait, has been Kremen the Movie. Evidently it was booked out well in advance, and the queue of people wanting to buy tickets stretched outside the theatre and around the corner on to the horizon. All those people who missed out, she assures me that it's going to become part of the Wait program of first semester, so you'll have a chance to see Kremen the Movie again. If you're like me and you cared not to see it with the other feature that it was on with, then you too will get a chance to see it when it comes on again in this semester at Wait in the normal BFC film program. What can you expect out at Wait in the next week? Well, tonight and tomorrow night there is a sort of a horror compilation, and that's the best way to look at it. A Razorhead and The Thing, John Campbell's story Who Goes There, not as the Wait program has a Donald A. Stewart, although I don't want you all writing in to tell me that Donald A. Stewart happens to be a pseudonym for John Campbell, so we're both correct, really. John Campbell is the name you'll probably know, though. An early short story of his, been filmed before, but John Carpenter does it in a different way, and boy, does he make it scary. A Razorhead is a different sort of horror movie, and if you want to be scared witless, then I'm sure Thursday and Friday you should be at Wait enjoying those programs. Saturday, Twilight's Last Gleaming at 1 o'clock with Burt Lancaster. A repeat from the 3rd festival, looks to be a very, very good movie indeed, and at 7:45, both the Supermans, Superman 1 and Superman 2, where Mario Puzo, the man of Godfather fame, updates the comic and gives you a rather tongue-in-cheek Superman, but nevertheless interesting viewing, and in Superman 2 some wonderful special effects. Probably the best thing about the movie, actually. If you want to catch up and have what's gone before so that you're prepared for Superman 3, which gets cinema release sometime in 1983, then you should be out at Wait on Saturday night. That program is repeated on Sunday, but my pick of Sunday, of course, is the heavy metal movies, which are on at 5:45 and 7:45 on Sunday. If you failed to see heavy metal when it was shown in the first week of the programming, then by all means catch it now, this Sunday out at Wait. Heavy Metal Movie is an animated science fiction and fantasy movie, it certainly is that, which features graphics from all the stable of Heavy Metal the magazine, and if you're into adult fantasy comics, then by all means you'll know Heavy Metal. Grew out of the French magazine Metal Hurlant, and this film features some of the best of those illustrators with animated works. On Monday, Well, Cat People's showing on Monday, and I'll mention that again in a minute. Tuesday and Wednesday leading us up to next week's program, well, there's Star Trek 2 and Caveman featuring together as a very, very good double. In fact, if you're only going out there once or twice in the next week, then I would say catch the heavy metal movie sometime on Sunday and get out there Tuesday or Wednesday at the 7:45 program and see that double, Star Trek 2, the movie that should have been number 1, in fact the 2 that should have been a 1 if you like it that way round, and Caveman, which features Ringo Starr, never really getting the woman that he lusts after, and Godzilla, well, it's not really Godzilla, but it looks awfully like it, that funny-looking dinosaur that they have featuring in Caveman who gets more than she bargained for. Very, very good movie and very funny. Star Trek 2 and Caveman, Tuesday and Wednesday, the 7:45 program at Wait. On Monday, Cat People, as I said, well, it's an interesting movie. Certainly, most of the comments have been, a horror movie of a difference. In fact, it features in a program, if you get out there at 5:45, of The Eyes of Laura Myers and others, the other program that's on with Cat People's The Sentinel, a horror program really with a science fictional flavour more than a science fiction program with a horror flavour. Cat People features the music of George Moroder, and that's what I remember the music, the film best for, and I'll be featuring a track from him in just a moment. For all of you buffs that are out there looking at the science fiction films, there is a new book available from Batsford by Alan Frank, he's the editor, called The Science Fiction and Fantasy Film Handbook. It's just recently become available in Perth. I'd recommend it to you. It's going to be the featured review of the first program in March of the Faster Than Light radio show, and I'll be speaking at greater length about it then. 1995 in the bookshops now, the Science Fiction and Fantasy Film Handbook, edited by Alan Frank and largely written by him. That track I promised you, this is a little flavour of Monday night's program out there at Wait. It's the music of George Moroder, and it's the theme for the woman of the movie, Nastasia Kinski, and she plays in the movie Irina, and here's Irina's theme. There we have some music of the very good George Moroder, the significant feature, I'd say, of the film Cat People, but by all means don't take my word for it. Get out there to wait and see the movie. If you're interested in catching up with the soundtrack, it's available through Polygram in Australia. Very interesting record, the soundtrack of Cat People. And of course there was the song which was featured in the credits of the movie, Putting Out Fire, sung by David Bowie. Again, lyrics that he put to the music of Giorgio Moroder. Well, I said at the beginning of the program that I wanted to have a look at the work of Gregory Benford. Gregory Benford is one of those authors that you may be unaware of. He's not a prolific author of science fiction, although he's had a number of works to date. I count up here, stacked in the studio, 5 novels, and I think I don't have one of his, so that makes 6. He's one of those authors who's produced regularly, but probably a novel every 2 or 3 years. And he first started getting published in 1965, so he's not all that long in the tooth as a writer goes, because he's been around a long time, but the amount of work that he's managed to put out means that he hasn't had the penetration of, say, your Heinlein or your early Asimov or even your early Silverberg. He's never been a mass writer in the sense of putting out thousands of short stories and churning out novels. What he has given us, though, is of some quality, and if you're unfamiliar with the name, is worth looking out for. The few background biographical details I've taken this time not from my favourite source, Peter Nichols' Encyclopedia of Science Fiction, which certainly does have an article on Gregory Benford, but I've taken them from an issue of Amazing Fantastic, the May 81 issue, in which they reprinted as one of their classic series Gregory Benford's Nobody Lives on Burton Street, which was one of his first ever published short stories. It says of Gregory Benford, Gregory Benford is a professor of physics at the University of California in Irvine. He received his PhD in theoretical physics from the University of California, San Diego in '67. He has published over 50 scientific papers and has been a Woodrow Wilson Fellow. He was a visiting fellow at Cambridge University, England in 1976 and 79. That's worth remembering for what we're going to talk about in a little while. His research interests include solid-state physics, plasma physics, and high-energy astrophysics. His astronomical research centres on the dynamics of pulsars, violent extragalactic events, and quasars. He writes the entry on general developments in physics for the Encyclopaedia Britannica. He has also published numerous articles in Natural History, Smithsonian, New Scientist, and other major periodicals. He has a number of novels published to date. In 1975, he received the Nebula Award of the Science Fiction Writers of America for short fiction. In 1981, they might update that article and say he received again the Nebula Award, this time for a novel, his new novel, Timescape. His stories have been published frequently in anthologies and Best Short Fiction of the Year, and his novels have been translated into 6 foreign languages. He lives at Laguna Beach, California. It says also of him that there is one novel which he has now rewritten and had published in variant forms 3 times. That novel is Jupiter Project. And I take it as you listen to this program, you're probably jotting down in the back of your memory Gregory Benford, so that next time you're in the newsagents, you'll probably pick up one of his novels. I think I'll start off with Jupiter Project, as it's one of his very early novels, and I say this because it's the novel you're most likely to see in the newsagents. Jupiter Project, in its most recent form, has only recently been released by Sphere Paperbacks, who have published most of his fiction, to the newsagents. It's available for $4.95 and it's out there now. Features a very interesting cover of a spaceship across a backdrop of a planet which, if you read the title and obviously look inside the book, is Jupiter. If you look closely at the spaceship, you'll see the spaceship is called Sagan, and this is by no means pure circumstance, but I say that advisedly because Sagan itself is the name of a spaceship, and obviously as a scientist that Gregory Benford would have known through his research and his associations through the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And Carl Sagan's research, as you will be now aware, and as most readers will be aware through the seeing of the very lengthy and very beautiful Cosmos series that the ABC screened last year, will be aware that he's interested in extraterrestrial life and extraterrestrial intelligence, and this is one of the themes of the book. This is a very early novel of Gregory Benford's, and one needs to keep that in mind. It was published in 1970 in its original form. This current edition of Jupiter Project that you can buy on the newsstands has been updated and was an edition published in the United States in 1980 and is now paperbacked for us. It's updated to take account of all of the new information that was learned about Jupiter in the NASA probes, and it is very good to read for its scientific accuracy from that point of view. However, it doesn't have the easy-flowing style that I associate with the latter Gregory Benford works. It was originally written for Athenium, which is a publishing house in the United States that specialises in young adult, teenagers, science fiction and fantasy. It was originally published in that form, and the novel now reads a little bit heavily because of those strictures. The protagonist, Matt, and his offsider, Jenny, and their friend, Zach, and the arch-villain of the piece, would you believe it, with a Russian-sounding name, Yuri, on this now very cosmopolitan Can, as they like to call it, an orbiting space station off Jupiter. They are a bunch of teenagers, and the novel is more concerned with their grappling with being teenagers and growing up in outer space, than it is with the actual being in outer space and being near Jupiter and the space life that there is out there. The book has a lot to say about those things, but it's more concerned with awakening sexually, awakening to the needs to perform in society, and awakening too to the need of finding your niche in society and learning what it is that you wish to cope with. Most of those things that one associates with being a teenager. The book has a lot to say about those, and sometimes does it a little heavy-handedly. This is not the Gregory Benford of later novels such as Timescape or The Stars in Shroud. This Gregory Benford, the Gregory Benford of Jupiter Project, even so manages in the last 3 chapters to give you an insight into extraterrestrial intelligence and the nature of it. There was one critic that I read talking about Jupiter Project that it said this is a prequel to Heinlein's own book, which was written for a young adult audience, which details the living of a life on Ganymede, one of the moons of Jupiter. In this particular book, the people of the space station are themselves attempting to terraform Ganymede, and there is much discussion between the protagonists and for us as a reader about the possibilities of doing just that. I would advise you to read the novel. I think it's worth reading, but keep in mind that it's now dated by 10 years in terms of what he's attempting to do as a writer, although the writing itself and its factual information is quite up to date. Having said that, what is the Gregory Benford of the middle period? The Gregory Benford of the middle period are 2 novels worth looking out for and certainly getting hold of. The Stars in Shroud and In the Ocean of Night. In the Ocean of Night was originally released as a MacDonald Futura, Orbit Futura paperback. It was one of the Quantum SF novels selected by Isaac Asimov and Ben Bova. A very, very good read, an interesting read that details with an alien spacecraft which approaches the universe, our universe and Earth, but it's not recognised for what it is because it's in the form of a planetoid or a very, very large hunk of rock at any rate. This alludes right back to the end of Jupiter Project. This same idea of artificial intelligence or an artificial mechanical means of going through the universe as more or less looking like an asteroid is picked up and used again in The Stars in Shroud. It would seem to me that all the way through the middle period of the middle 70s, Gregory Benford is dealing with stuff that he's dealt with in many of his short stories and is attempting to look at artificial life forms, artificial intelligence and that first contact experience and looking at them from very much one point of view. So he has in his hand, if you like, one scenario for a novel which he approaches through different characters and through different angles, so that the whole lot of them might be considered one story, but many, many facets of the same story. You get a different approach and different flavour as you look at this scenario, this artificial intelligence, this artificial mechanism, this alien being, through the eyes of different protagonists. Of these, the best received critically, and certainly the one I enjoyed the most, was The Stars in Shroud. This is a Sphere paperback, came out originally in let me just have a look at the back of the cover here, 1979, and published in Sphere the same year. Very, very good paperback, dealing with a fix-up and an update of a number of short stories of his, and it takes involved in the story itself, in the fix-up, is the award-winning novella, which is the title of If the Stars Are Gods. Now, coming to the story itself, you'll find when you get this that it reads a little bit like 2 or 3 stories linked together, and that's maybe my biggest fault with it, but nevertheless, I enjoyed it all the same. To give you a flavour of the lighting, we flew blind, sniffing our way in with occasional radar-like pulses from our mass detectors, but the Farrakeen's permanent log knew Earth space the way my tongue knows my teeth. We kept a course, bead on a conchu wire. When the Farrakeen burst free of the snarling plasma, we hung over a herd of ram scoops, glinting metal grey. They were awaiting loading for the Empire worlds unmanned. They rode a standard parking orbit that had not deviated in centuries. I could have given the orbital coordinates to 2 places from memory. The scoops were the sheep we wolves would hide among. They drifted, several hundred strong, webbed on repulsion lines to prevent slight perturbations from causing collisions. Some were damaged, fire-pitted, probably useless. Others gaped wide in their guts, mouths being loaded by automatic shuttles. Every few days a scoop was nudged out by low-impulse reaction motors and cast off on a long hydrogen-gobbling course. Sol System had no flinger to make the first acceleration cheap, so Earth usually had an excess of scoops waiting for reflight. More came to Rome than returned to the colonies. You're saying to yourself, well, that was a very interesting bit of jargon, but what was it all about? And what's the story about? What's all this stuff to do with the actual getting on of these aliens? And what's all this stuff about slingers and all this other sort of slang that he's managed to build in here? Well, Gregory Benford uses a lot of the standard jargonese of the science fiction reader, but he doesn't do it, that's from towards the end of the novel, he doesn't do it at the beginning. He welds it all in very slowly, and at the same time allows you to grow with him as he uses his technology and his science fictional jargonese. Gregory Benford, being a good scientist, also gives you good physics and good ideas in the novels that he's getting at. Gregory Benford, the reformed writer, the one who's got more than one scenario to look at, comes to us in Timescape. This won the 1980 Nebula Award and is a major work of science fiction. If you're unfamiliar with it, Sphere have only just released it to the newsagents. It's now available for $5.95, and I would suggest that, like The Stars in Shroud and Jupiter Project, this too is worth looking out for. Timescape deals with a Cambridge professor on one timeline, set in the late 1900s, turn of the millennium, early 2000. This professor is dealing with the possibility of sending a message back in time using a tachyon, which is a faster-than-light particle. He manages to position where the Earth should have been some years ago and warns the Earth of some years ago by sending back a Morse-coded message on a tachyon beam. The trouble is there anyone back there who can pick it up? And the other stream of the story deals with some rather hippie-like scientific professors of the 1960s at Californian universities who are dealing with their own experiment, and it keeps on going wrong for some unknown reason. Some message is interrupting, something is making noise in their project. Unravelling the noise, they found that it's logical, and thus they have a conflict. But do we have a time paradox? And it's attempting to unravel whether someone in the future can alter the present and therefore alter the future and not at the same time do away with that future. It's in unravelling that particular point of view that I think Timescape has particular strengths. Another very interesting point of view of the novel is the way in which Gregory Benford perceives the role and the life of the scientist. We have many cameos in this book of different sorts of scientists. The scientist who chases a fame and glory through sitting on conferences and chairing meetings and who goes after a political lifestyle. The scientist who manages to stick it out in the lab, get very good at his work, have a nice home life, and at the same time looks for something more in his life than everything that the lab is giving him. We have the hippie professor who looks for everything in his life apart from what the lab is giving him, and at the same time still manages to get out his work. And all of these, to anyone who's been associated with an academic environment, especially in the sciences, all of these we can put name to, I'm sure, from our own experience. Gregory Benford writes about in this book real scientists and real people in real situations, and at the same time manages to bend current science so that we somehow believe the science he's offering with his faster-than-light tachyons and the way in which he puts them to work is plausible. I'd recommend Timescape to you, $5.95 as I said, out there in the shops and available now. Here's a little reminder of something that you should be aware of, and if you aren't, I'm going to continue to remind you throughout 1983.
This is Jack Herman, convener of the committee for SimCon 83, hoping to see as many Western Australians as can get over in Sydney June 10 to 13, 1983 for the National Convention with Harlan Ellison and Van Eycken.
As I said on last week's show, if you want to take Jack's advice and become part of SimCon 83, the 1983 National Australian Science Fiction Convention, drop a line to the station and I'll send you out the address whereby you can become a member or get associated with WASFA, who are meeting this Friday night in 7th Avenue in Maylands, and by all means get out there to the kids' school in Maylands and be part of WASFA. I think the meeting gets underway at 7:30, and of course you can pick up the address for the National Convention while you're out there. Harlan Ellison looks like being a blast, and I of course attend to review a lot of his material closer to the time. Van Eycken, who's also mentioned in the ad that has been put together for me there by Jack, has just published a book he's edited for the University of Queensland Press called Australian Science Fiction, the first historical anthology. It includes people from as early as 1845 all the way through to 1979, with a Lee Harding a bit out of Displaced Person and a short story by Philippa Madden. If you're interested in Australian science fiction, look out for that book. It's well worth getting hold of. I'm going to make it a featured review on the show sometime in towards the end of March, and I hope to feature an interview with Van at the same time. So be staying tuned for that. It's well worth looking into. The newsstands. A lot of interesting stuff out there in the newsstands currently. One thing I'd commend to you, for all of those of us which are of a hard fact science fiction line and therefore probably more interested in the Gregory Benford type of fiction where real facts are involved with the stories, then I'd suggest that you get hold of Analog, which is the science fiction science fact magazine, and continues this with in the current December issue, which we've just received at Murdoch, which starts a new novel by Robert Forward. If anyone's a fantastic physicist writing science fiction, it would have to be Forward, another new author. Roche World, the first part of what looks to be a 3-part series, and in it also is as advertised on the cover, a non-fiction story by Richard C. Hoagland called The Blivet in the B-Ring. The B-Ring being a ring of Saturn, and the Blivet being an unexplained radio phenomena. And if you're interested in what I'm talking about, get hold of the December issue of Analog. Should be going onto the newsstands in the next month or so, and have a read. Well worth looking out for, as most issues of Analog are. That about does me for this particular show. Can I just in passing remind you that you ought to get hold of the FM guide, the 6UVS FM stereo FM guide, which is available through newsagents or by writing into the station and subscribing to it, $10 for the year. It's worth having because now, each Thursday, you'll be able to see what it is I'm going to be talking about in my featured review. And if you manage to get hold of the guide and have a look, you'll realise that next week we'll be talking about Jack Chalker, another fan turned professional science fiction writer who's not too bad at all. But I'll save my comments until next week. Catch you then. Bye for now.
Wonderful galaxy, starship, take us away, take us away, take us away.